author of Metamorphosis of Prime Intellect. I was looking back at our last episode and I realized I think there's like a 1 second delay between you and I.
Yeah.
Because we'd both start talking and pause and you keep going. So I'm just gonna shut up this episode and just let you talk, and we can we'll completely circumvent that.
I think we actually got to the point where we were negotiating it pretty well, sort of by instinct. I mean, that's true in a lot of phone media nowadays, anyway.
Yeah.
So that's how they prevent feedback loops, and plus there's the usual transmission delays and encoding and decoding and all this falderall.
Yeah.
But anyway, I seem to have recalled mentioning the word insects last time.
Insects.
And it's like, oh yeah, porn.
Yeah, the history of porn. It was weird because we talked about vacuum tubes, and then the next morning I had on a guy that does laser cleaning, and it was just like
I did see a bit of him.
Yeah, it's just like the opposite ends of like early 1900s, almost like steampunkish, and then it's like the billionth of a micrometer. To me, that sounded as ludicrous as Prime Intellect saying, I moved it out into intergalactic space. It was like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, and I thought the coolest thing about that line is that most people would have expected it to be interstellar space.
Yeah.
But it's like,
nope.
You know,
just nope. I can do anything. I'm God. Intergalactic, inner supercluster space. Just wherever you want. Do whatever you want.
But anyway, the more risque chapters of Prime Intellect have attracted the interest of some people who had other interesting interests. Mm-hmm. And I've always been interested in how things work. And one of the biggest mysteries is how people work. And things like pornography are fascinating to me because they reveal patterns of usage and patterns of behavior that otherwise get kind of hidden because we are such complicated mishmashes of behavior. And I do like to say, too, it's like when you have people doing something that is sanctioned that's not necessarily what you would consider optimizing things for yourself. You know, it's like, well, why do people do this thing that isn't necessarily to their advantage? And I've also like to make the point is that when you're trying to figure out how something works, it's easier to make progress if you watch it when it's broken.
Yeah.
If you watch cars drive by all day long and you have no idea how a car works, then you might not know you might not be able to figure out what's making them move forward. Is it fire? Is it electricity? Is the guy pushing with his feet? How do you what's doing that? But if you see one going by belching black smoke, then you know fire is involved somehow. And I think that porn is really interesting because it's a very basic behavior. It's something where our primal urges are interfacing directly with the more complex world. Mm. And I have a rather different reconstruction of how it's progressed than most people do. You've probably heard the phrase that porn drives technology, which became a bit...
my next door neighbors are like young children, and I realize I have my window open because the weather's great. And of all podcast episodes, this might not be the one for them to. I don't think they can hear it. They're a floor below me and across the lawn, and there are planes flying. But just for the sake of being a good human, these 10-year-olds don't need to hear this conversation. Of all episodes, I decided to have the windows open. It just so happens to be the one where we get off onto. Let's talk about porn. My luck would be whoop whoop. See some cop cars coming up like, hey, Mr. Kerrigan, we're with the FBI. I'd be like, for what? You guys fans of the podcast? Not really. Okay.
I don't know, actually. If they have internet access, we're not going to talk about anything they haven't already seen.
You know, you're right, but I'm going to let their parents deal with that, not me. Because hey, that's fine if those are your kids. It's a lot weirder if it's a 30-year-old dude across the street like, hey, like, nope, I ain't dipping my toes in there. Nope. Windows are closed, though, so we're good. Porn.
Yeah, okay. So, anyway, it became popular to say that porn drives technology in the mid-'90s because a lot of the early web marketing stuff was invented by the porn industry. But my read on it is exactly the opposite. Technology has always driven porn. And you have to see porn as a system. It involves content creation, distribution, and patterns of consumption. And all of those things are important, and all of those things define what I consider like a phase of the development of porn.
Okay.
Now, if you put the phrase history of porn into the Google, you'll get dozens of hits, almost all of which will start with Paleolithic figurines and Greek and Roman art. And I consider that completely wrong. Those things are not pornography because they're not made, they're not distributed, and they're not used the way that pornography is. The Paleolithic figurines are religious icons. They represent the fecundity and fertility of both humans and the earth, and they're meant to be used in rituals. They're not meant to be used as sex aids. Similarly, if you are a wealthy Roman householder and you commission a painting of two people copulating on your living room wall, not your bedroom wall, your living room wall, because this is what they found in Pompeii. Mm-hmm. When the Victorians excavated Pompeii, they were shocked at all the sexual imagery that they uncovered and everywhere. So it's like literally you would have pictures like this in your living room. Okay. Now, why do you do that? You're not doing that to strike a boner. Okay. I mean, it's just part of the mood. You're doing that to establish a mood. The same reason you might paint the room green instead of blue. It's more to say you're establishing a mood of sensuality and relaxation and entertainment. Because the other thing about the Romans in particular is they don't seem to have had the idea that we do at all, that sex needs to be private or that it should be sanctioned. Yeah. So to them, being naked in public might be humiliating if you were a higher class person who should have more dignity than that. But it wasn't like we would consider it a crime and the end of the world or something, you know. In fact, this was depicted pretty well in the HBO series Rome, where there were a couple of scenes where Lycadia was actually fucking somebody, and slaves would come in and distract them with questions and all, and they would just attend to it and then go back to what they were doing and all. Mm-hmm. It's just like it's not like having them walking on you while you're having sex was like, oh my god. Yeah. It was just a thing that you would do, like any other thing that you would do.
Having a good meal, like go away. I'm eating. Go away. It's
exactly just a different appetite.
Yeah.
So when did porn actually come about, the way that we think of it today? And my contention is that it came about in the mid-17th century, and it was in the form of pamphlets. And this was mostly in France. There was a bit of it in England and some of the other European countries too, but France was the hotbed of pamphleting. And it was driven by a two-pronged thing. Part of it was political, and there were a lot of dissenting political pamphlets. And the mechanism for distributing something that was sanctioned by the authorities was really invented for them, but that made it possible to distribute things that were sanctioned for other reasons. So you had pornographic pamphlets. In fact, a lot of the political pamphlets were pornographic. They were like pornographic depictions of the royals, particularly Marie Antoinette, doing things that's salacious. And of course, you had the Marquis de Sade operating at this time. And he took it all to the max as far as extremes, as far as pushing boundaries. And the way that these things were distributed, okay, the nice thing about pamphlets is they're fairly easy to produce in small quantities. You can produce them on a small press. So it doesn't take a lot of infrastructure, which is important for something that is sanctioned, because you always have a risk that it'll be seized, that that you'll have a raid. And it was distributed by street runners. Almost exactly the same way that illegal drugs are still distributed today almost everywhere. You would have a guy standing on a street corner, and you would never know where he was going to be. He wouldn't have much product on him, so if the cops came, he could just run. Yeah. He wouldn't have much product, so he would have lookouts. And since he wouldn't have much product, there would be a place that he could go nearby to re-up when he exhausted what he had on his person. And so this was a system that had been made very effective over the course of an entire century. And this was the primary distribution method for pornographic things through the middle of the 19th century. And there were no photographs, obviously. There were drawings. In the the thing is, the technology of the day required you to do a woodcut to print a drawing or something like that, because there were no photographic techniques. But there were like cartoonish representations of the royals that you were, involving things like that.
Sure.
But that was a channel of porn, a system of production. You would have the original writers who created the content would generally be paid once. And this is a theme that goes straight through to today, which is the actual content creators don't get much of the money, if they get any, because they tend to be paid one time, work for hire basis, where that's the legal thing, and they never see anything else. It's the printers and distributors who get the lion's share of the money, but then that's always been considered fair because they also take the lion's share of the risk. They're the ones who are going to get caught if your print shop is raided, or if you get busted because one of your street runners is caught and rats you out or something.
Sure.
But that was the system, and then people would buy these things and they would read them, and it's a convenient length to use as a masturbation aid or to read to your significant other or whatever. And so that completes the loop. You've got production, distribution, consumption, and the consumption being the use as an aphrodisiac type sex aid sort of factor. So this was what there was until, like I said, the mid-1800s. Now, in 1840, John Cleland wrote Fanny Hill. He got a one-time payment for it, and it was published. But at that time, it didn't spawn a lot of imitators, and it wasn't wildly popular. And, of course, it ran afoul of a bunch of laws, so there was a lot of back and forth about the legality of doing that. There weren't any underground channels, really, for distributing it. That didn't come around, ironically, until after 1857, when Britain passed the Obscene Publications Act. And now, this stuff had been a misdemeanor. Now it was a crime.
Okay.
And all of a sudden it became wildly popular. So this began the era of the Victorian novel.
Ban it and it becomes popular.
Yeah. The Pearl, A Man with a Maid, My Secret Life, all of these things.
Sure.
They were hugely popular. They were a lot of copies were published, and of course they're still in print today because no one has to pay copyright royalties on them, and they're a rather unique product because they're long. They have this whole flowery Victorian way of talking about things, and they are extremely perverted. They have an obsession with whipping and corporal punishment in particular. I mean, they don't call it the English vice for nothing. This was a very English phenomenon. But this required different production and distribution methods. So at the time, the Industrial Revolution was raging. There was a lot of movement to the cities. There was a lot of noise going on where you could hide a bigger operation. So you could hide a printing operation large enough to produce a book and have a good chance of doing a print run without it getting raided. But you can't sell books on the street. They're too heavy. So what happened now is you would have a shop, a storefront, where they're selling otherwise legal stuff, but if you know the proprietor and you know the secret handshake and the password, or you're referred by a customer, then you get to see the secret stash under the counter. And that would be the model until the 1950s. In both England and the United States for books and for other things that would come afterward. Now, at the time, you had photographs. The first, they like to say the first erotic photograph in 1839, the first erotic film in 1896. That wasn't porn because there was no. First of all, the production had no production values. It was just point the camera at the naked girl, take a picture, point the film camera at that first erotic film was of a middle-aged couple having pedestrian sex. I mean, there was like nothing, but it was just like, hey, you guys willing to get in front of the camera? Yeah, sure. I mean, I think of that as novelties more than pornography. Yeah. And you would, if you had access to it at all, I mean, you got to remember, to watch a film until until well into the 1970s, to watch any film at all, you had to set up a projector.
You were probably well-to-do.
Yeah. Well, there was a channel once well, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let's do it in order. Okay, so we've done print. Now, photography evolved. Still photography went through a couple of phases. In the early 1900s, you started to see photo sets appearing along with the books under the counter. And that's exactly what it sounded like. It wasn't like a magazine. It would actually be a stack of photos copied on a copy stand on photographic film. And the reason for that is that printing was still evolving toward the ability to offset print a photograph. The equipment that could do that was crappy at first. It was expensive. It was a big risk to use it to lay out something like a magazine that could be seized if it was discovered because it's full of illegal images, because the Comstock Act was still in full force in the early 20th century. So what they would do is you could make you could duplicate one of these photo sets, though, on just a copy stand and develop the film yourself in a darkroom in an ordinary house or wherever, and you didn't have to do a lot of them at once. And so this was the primary means of distributing photographs until really the mid 50s. You had offset, four color printing was invented and became reasonably good quality in the 30s. You started to see it used by Time and magazines like that. But again, it's too expensive to use for porn because you can't set up an operation of that scale and risk having it raided and shut down and your equipment seized. So it was very gradual that the porn moved into technologies that had become convenient enough to allow for the production. And at this time, it was still being distributed under the counter of that otherwise conventional shop. The under-the-counter thing is illustrated really nicely in the very first scene of the Betty Page biopic, the notorious Betty Page, where they show one of these shop owners. He's got a shop that is kind of on the seedy side, but it's legal because he's showing the girly magazines like Maxim. That was another thing. You had these magazines that were legal, but skirted the edge of nudity and told stories with an erotic undertone. But they stayed just that far from the line. But the same shop, he had the good stuff under the counter. And so this guy comes in making like he's a major pervert and he wants to see the good stuff, and finally convinces the shopkeeper to bring out the photo set. And it's an Irving Klaw photo set of Betty Page doing one of those bondage things. And he's a Fed, busts the guy, and he rats out Irving Klaw, which is how Betty Page ends up in a congressional hearing in the next scene. So that was sort of your thing until 1953. So you've got this gradually evolving thing. You've got the magazines getting a little closer to the line. You've got mostly photo sets. By the 50s, you actually did have a few hardcore magazines that would be distributed on the sly, but it was still an expensive proposition. There was no good way to get that stuff to the public without a lot of risk. And what broke the next wave, what started the next phase, was this guy named Hugh Hefner comes along. And he has this idea for a magazine that will show full nudity, but in a classy way, with lifestyle stuff and interviews and really good content to show that, it's an all-around thing that the well-read gentleman would be completely interested in. And so Hef borrowed $8,000 to laid out the first episode of the first issue of Playboy on his kitchen table, and didn't even date it because he didn't know if there would be a second issue.
Jesus.
So, but it turned out to be wildly popular.
It's inspiring.
And
yeah.
It came in at just the right time, though, when the mores had relaxed just enough that mainstream shops were willing to carry something like this. And it was extremely popular, which helped. That first issue sold out in weeks. And so that started that trend. And you had let's see, I've got a couple of notes up here. 1965, Penthouse was founded, pushing the envelope a little further. 1974, Hustler So you had these mainstream magazines moving the goalpost a little further toward the seedy side. And meanwhile, the seedy side was getting a little more, not reputable, but you started to see adult bookstores where they would just not let you in if you were under 18,
Sure.
and they would actually have the full nudity and everything. And again, they had constant problems with the law. Now, around the mid-'60s, the producers of all this stuff, particularly the stuff for adult bookstores, kind of got together, because you got to remember, they had all been criminals 10 years before. So a lot of this really did come from organized crime. And they hired a lawyer to draft a set of guidelines and asked them, how can we minimize these prosecutions by podunk sheriffs? I mean, it really sucks if you're a publisher in New York City and you get a subpoena from Podunk Valley, Georgia, about some magazine that got seized, or your shipment got seized.
Yeah.
And so they came up with a common set of guidelines. And that was stuff like no golden showers, no scat, obviously. I mean, some of it's pretty obvious. Some of it is less obvious. One of the big ones was you could have like extreme close-ups showing penetration, sexual penetration,
Sure.
but you couldn't show penetration in the same context as bondage. So you couldn't show penetration of a model who was tied up.
Okay.
That was too close to depicting a crime.
Okay.
And so there were a number of things like that. And it resulted in some almost hilarious things where people would go into an adult bookstore and pay $20 for a magazine that contains mostly pictures of girls who have all their clothes on because they're tied up. So, but that was the situation, and it was it mostly solved the problem, because when there was another prosecution, they would say, look, Judge, we have these guidelines. We were advised that if we stuck with these, that we were mostly within the guidelines. We're making sure that children can't get it, blah, blah, blah. And by the way, have you heard of this thing called the First Amendment? We think that we have a right to do this. And for the most part, that kept them out of trouble. And that is exactly where things stayed until the mid-'90s, as far as the lower tier, the more risque end of print photographic bondage. Now, when the Comstock Act was passed, when prosecutions were mounted about all this, one of the things that always comes up is, the founding fathers couldn't have possibly imagined, stuff like this when they wrote the First Amendment. So they obviously meant except for this stuff.
Yeah.
Except, and I've always maintained that that's bullshit.
That's horseshit. Yeah, it's fucking free speech. The end.
Well, and this is the reason. Okay, if you think about it, during the Revolutionary War in the late 1700s, France was our biggest ally. Mm-hmm. And we had a constant diplomatic presence in Paris. It was Benjamin Franklin for a few years. It was John Adams for a few years, as depicted in his miniseries. So the founders were very aware of French politics. It was very important to them. Mm. And what did you have in France? You had all these fucking pamphleteers running around.
Yeah. So they knew it. Yeah.
So it's like, yes, when they wrote the First Amendment, they knew exactly what they were making legal. They decided that a healthy society can tolerate this stuff.
Make your own decision. You don't need Big Brother telling you that you can't look at penetration, right? It's fuck off. Welcome to America.
Well, yeah. So, they didn't have photography then, but boy, some of the stuff they had was way more extreme in text form. So anyway, that gets us to movies. As I said, and production values were just, until the magazines started picking it up, the production values for a photo set or for one of these like sex shop porn mags were just basic. Mm-hmm. I mean, you could tell in the early days there were just no production values. If a girl was willing to take off her clothes, you pointed the camera at her, and that was how you got photos. Sure. And then a lot of them were taken obviously in film studios with seamless backdrops and stuff. So this was sort of the standard. It wasn't really until Playboy came along that people started to think of applying like production standards to erotic productions, and just like you would if you were taking a picture of or any other kind of magazine illustration, where you would control the lighting and control the background and control the setting and everything in order to make it look the way you wanted. And the same was with film. You would have mostly stag films. All right, so there's no production values. It's just you find a couple that's willing to screw in front of a running camera, pay them $100, whatever.
Is that what a stag film is?
Then
I never knew what a stag film was. I'd heard the term. I just never bothered to look it up.
That's what it is. It's a short film, generally 5 or 10 minutes, that shows a sexual encounter. And the reason they call them stag films is that one of the primary places you might see one would be at a stag party, like a bachelor party, where you've got a bunch of guys hanging around, you're doing risque stuff. So they would rent a projector and they would have a few of these films, and the guys would watch it. And again, I would say that's not really pornographic, though, because you're using it as titillation, but you're not using it as a sex aid when all the guys are hanging around laughing at each other while they watch the movie. That's a different phenomenon. Sure. As far as using it as a sex aid, I don't know about you, but I have never been so hard up for a Woody that I would have gone to the trouble to set up and thread a film projector in order to see 5 or 10 minutes of film. No. It's a pain in the ass. But what you could do in some places was go to an adult bookstore and rent a booth where the projector would be set up for you. Or you could go to an adult theater where they would play these things, and they would just play them one after the other with an intermission. And again, that doesn't sound like much fun, because you're going there to get a Woody and whack off in an auditorium in front of 200 other seats. That doesn't work too well for me either. No. So this brings us on film to 1970, or actually 1969. Andy Warhol made a film called Blue Movie, which had some very explicit sexual scenes in it. I've never actually seen it, but it's one of the things that comes up in these histories. And Andy Warhol could get away with this because at that time, anything Andy Warhol did was art, because Andy Warhol did it. And if he painted a can of Campbell soup, that was art. Okay,
that's sweet spot.
So if he made a film that showed full penetration and frontal nudity, that was art. Just like if somebody painted that and put it on the wall of a museum, it was art. Sure. Again, it's not pornography because no one's whacking off to it in front of all of the other gallery visitors, right? Sure. Well, in let's see, make sure I get the date right here. In 1969, you also had Midnight Cowboy came out, and that was an explicit attempt to show that you could make a good film in the space of the X rating. They explicitly set out to get an X rating and to show that a film with an X rating could be a good film. Got a bunch of awards, got a bunch of attention. Then you had Last Tango in Paris in 1972, which wasn't quite as explicit as Midnight Cowboy, but it was in the same general class. It got an X rating, but was a well-considered film. But the flirtation of mainstream films with pornographic images also inspired some of the porn producers who were making these stag films and photo sets for crappy magazines to wonder what they could do if they flirted with more Hollywood-like movie-making techniques and tried to make a little higher quality product from their end. And so the first example of this was Deep Throat in 1972. And in order to see it, you had to go to one of these seedy pornographic movie theaters. But it was wildly successful. And why? Because it's an hour and a half long movie. I don't remember the exact running time, but it told a story with an actual plot and with actual scenes that weren't sex scenes connecting the sex scenes, so that there was a progression of things going on. So it was like a movie. And otherwise, the production was not that very good quality. It was still, very much a product of the sex industry, but it showed that something more interesting was possible. And so after that, you had, in order, The Devil and Miss Jones, Behind the Green Door, which were higher quality. The Devil and Miss Jones was very well regarded. And Roger Ebert actually gave it a positive review. It started a phenomenon that they called film chic, of legitimate mainstream movie critics reviewing these porno films. And it just snowballed because even though you had to go to an adult theater to see it, it was more of an experience that you could sell to your girlfriend or wife. That and it was an edgy thing that a couple could do if they wanted to show how
spice it up.
Modern and forward-looking they were and all. And they were very successful, and so more and more of them were made. This was the golden age of porn, and that's what basically caused it. So you had these guys that had been porno producers hiring talent, and a lot of aspiring screenwriters and lighting specialists, wardrobe plots, because when you're paying $40,000 to rent your camera equipment, it makes some sense to spend a little coin on the rest of it too, because film production ain't cheap, and finding people who can actually say their lines without being laughable about it, So some of these films are to this day are actually regarded as pretty good movies, despite the fact that they're porn films. But again, it was the distribution, though, was a bottleneck, because how do you see them? You got to go to an adult theater. They're too long to do the booth in the back of the adult bookstore thing, and legitimate theaters wouldn't go anywhere near them. So that was the bottleneck until home video was invented. And that changed the world, because when video rental shops started to pop up, almost all of them had a back room. And unlike the secret stash under the counter, that was fairly public. They were open about it. The cops knew it was there. There were places where they had problems because of it. They had to close the back room and stop doing it. But for the most part, it reached a stable state where you could rent these films, or you could mail order them if you found a link, and then you would get coupons and you would get flyers for other producers that you could patronize. So you could order these, get them in a brown envelope, watch them on your VCR. No one's the wiser. You don't have to worry about whether anyone sees you going into the downtown theater. Sure. So that became the primary distribution medium for pornographic film overnight. The adult theaters completely disappeared within a few years. There was really no reason except nostalgia to go to one. But the end of the golden age of porn came in the mid-'80s, and that was when videotape became good enough to be used as the primary recording medium. This was a world where, as I said last week, your TV series for broadcast on television were all filmed on 35 millimeter, because videotape was very awkward to edit. It was not very good. The equipment wasn't portable. Well, all of that was changing in the early 80s because of the home video boom. They were making so much of this equipment that it was becoming more technologically advanced very fast. And again, people like to say that porn drives movies, but what really happened, porn drives technology rather, but what really happened was technology drove the porn. And so as soon as it became technically feasible, people started producing the porn movies on video. And the standards went, because you're not paying $40,000 for your cameras anymore, so you're not going to pay for the wardrobe artist and the set design and all that. So it became more where the producer would rent a house, and you would use whatever the owners of the house left behind as props, and people would pretty much wear whatever they owned when they came on set. And so it was a big step downhill from the 70s. And that's pretty much where things stayed until the mid-'90s. Now, you'll notice that I had just ended two of these threads and that's where things stayed until the mid-'90s. And what happened in the mid-'90s was internet porn. Okay. And again, it wasn't that porn drove the creation of this. It's that technology reached a point. Before 1995, most computers couldn't display a pornographic image. Or if they tried, the quality was so poor, it was more of a curiosity than something that you would use. And it was in the mid-'90s that the technology, the compression standards, the display technology, and the internet delivery became just barely adequate to support mostly still film pornography delivery. Movies were still kind of a stretch unless you had a really good reason. And the really good reason turned out to be fetish porn, because the mainstream distribution channel basically reached everybody with the same content. So if you had some fringe interest, then you rarely saw it in the porn in the adult bookstore. You might see that now the adult bookstore might actually have some fetish magazines, but you rarely saw it in film because it wasn't worth producing. You rarely saw you rarely saw it in mainstream stuff. You never saw it with decent production values, or I should probably say good production values. Decent not being the right word there. But that was what drove the first wave of internet porn. Really was more fetishy stuff, because computers couldn't really compete with print for mainstream porn. The image quality was crap. The delivery was slow and not very reliable. And also, a computer is not a very convenient viewing tool to use for viewing porn. You can't take it to bed. You can't use it in the bathtub. It's just not really conducive to some of the ways people would prefer to use their masturbation aids. But again, if you are interested in something particular that wasn't depicted very often, then it was worth it to you to deal with the low resolution and the slow image delivery and all, because you couldn't get it very often anywhere else. And in the mid-'70s, they came out with something called the RIM report that breathlessly said that 70% of the images on the internet, which then was Usenet, they didn't even have websites back then for distributing this stuff, was fetish imagery. And sensational crap that wasn't really true, but that led to the passing of the Communications Decency Act in 75. But there was this thing called the First Amendment, and the CDA was struck down by the Supreme Court about a year later. So this is where you were. You had this barely adequate technology in computer land, and the porn sites that existed had come up with ways to be paid, online payment with credit cards, banner ads for promotion. They had invented all this stuff and were using it to promote themselves and to, basically they did invent web marketing. That is probably the one case where I will admit that porn drove the technology, because the technology had to get good enough for porn to take an interest in it. Because you wouldn't have wanted to try to watch porn as it could be displayed on a computer in 1990. Yeah. I mean, it was a 16-color VGA.
Yeah. Tetris.
But you had this wedge with the fetish producers, and into that gap stepped a guy named Brent Scott. And he founded a site called Insex.com. Now, Brent had seen a hentai show in person, a live hentai show in Japan when he was in the service, when he was in the Army, and he was besotted. He was enthralled. But they did this little show where the waitress served them food, and then the guy came out and wrestled her to the ground and tore off her clothes and tied her up, and while they were sitting there eating the food that she had served them and all. And he wanted to bring this art form to the United States. Sure. But he found out that he couldn't, because no one would publish it because of the guidelines that the whole porn industry was following to avoid having their shit seized and all of these prosecutions launched against them and everything. And in the late 90s, his life was falling apart. His marriage had failed. Couldn't have had anything to do with the bondage studio in the attic and all the models coming through. But
not that.
For some reason, his wife left him.
Yeah, it was for some other reason. She was probably just a bitch, right? Couldn't be that.
And he was starting to realize that Carnegie Mellon was never going to give him tenure, because something about his field of interest being bondage porn and how it with society. So he famously, as he has told the story, had a big argument with the dean and stormed out of the dean's office at CMU saying, "All right, then, if you won't let me educate your children, I will corrupt them." And CMU are the people who taught him how to do web design, state of the art, in the 1990s. So in late 1997, he decides to start a website. What he realized is that on the internet, there is no enforcement mechanism. They can't seize your shipments because there are no shipments to seize. At that time, particularly, they couldn't even prove someone had done business with you. It was all completely private and under the table.
Yeah, Wild West.
And this was the point where it became the Wild West. And, until he came along, everyone had still pretty much been following those guidelines for printed porn by habit. And I'm sure that he tried to get his stuff published. It was one of the reasons he became a university professor, was to try to put it under that, if I do it this way, it's art, and so it's okay, but art isn't porn. And what he wanted to do was create porn. I got to give the guy credit for that. So he realizes that he can do whatever the fuck he wants. And he does. Woo. So Sid Black, who would become one of the dominants who would work with both Insects and Hogtied and the other company that I'll talk about in a minute, is in a documentary that I'll also talk about in a minute, says in those early days when Insects first came around, they did no advertising, no promotion. It was all word of mouth. The only way you found out this site existed was to hear it from one of the other users. And personally, I didn't even know it existed until after it had gone out of business. I found out about it all this later. But Sid was like, we didn't know who this guy was. It's like, for all we knew, he really was kidnapping girls and torturing them in his basement. Sure. But his vision was more like to take, something like Ilsa She-Wolf of the SS and actually film all the shit that they couldn't put in that movie because it was too graphic and extreme. And it did turn out, of course, he was paying his models well and getting them to emote and also it was acting. But his vision was very gritty and very dark and very extreme. And he did whatever the fuck he wanted. And the other producers in that line of industry, at that time, there was a guy named Peter Ackworth who had a site called Hogtied, who was doing pretty well for himself. And he took note. And some of those relaxed their standards a bit, but none of them ever became quite as extreme as Insects. And I think part of that was because what Insects was doing was so extreme, it was actually off-putting to a lot of people. And it was also the feeling that it was the Wild West, but, the Wild West came to an end. And so everybody was wondering if a shoe was going to drop, and everyone was pretty sure if it did, it was going to fall on Insects first, which it did. But anyway, the way that I know now the way I know about this is there is a fantastic documentary called Graphic Sexual Horror that was made after the site closed by two of the women who worked on it for most of the time it existed. And it does a fantastic job of laying out how it came about, how and why Brent founded it, the wacky stuff that they did. Also, Brent going too far in some ways. They have a whole section on how the money corrupted the whole idea of whether there was really consent. Does the safe word really mean anything if you're afraid you'll never be invited to come back if you use it? And then, of course, how it got shut down. So Brent did whatever the fuck he wanted for 7 years. And in 2005, he got shut down. But the way that happened was very insidious. Throughout the industry, people were noticing it was getting hard to find credit card processors who would work with them. And without a credit card processor, you couldn't get paid because that's how you got paid. If you were a web service, someone puts their credit card number in your computer and you can run a transaction. Well, Insects lost 3 credit card servicers in a row, and we're having to go to sketchy banks in the Far East. And finally, one of his bankers showed him the national security letter. The Department of Justice was sending his bankers secret letters. It was illegal to show this letter to anybody, saying that the site was promoting terrorism and that they had to stop doing business with them. This was under the Patriot Act. Now,
the terrorists won.
Yeah, Thorne was funding terrorism.
God damn.
Now, if you'll recall, when the Patriot Act was passed, people who passed it pinky swore on a stack of Bibles that it would never, ever, ever, ever be used except against the worst of the very baddest bad guys. Well, after Brent's banker showed him the letter and he realized what was going on, he folded the site. They put up a notice and said, this is what happened, and we are not going to put up a fight that we can't win against an entity like the government that is so well. We would probably win it if we did, because we know we are in the right. This is a clear illegal abuse of the law, but I am not going to be the person who fights this. Now, before I go on, let's talk a little bit about Insex's business model and what he had going. Insex was very different from most other porn sites. They didn't sell their stuff a la carte. If you wanted to do business with Insex, you bought a ticket, $60, and it gave you access for 1 month to the entire site, the archives, the current material, everything. Now, you might wonder why someone wouldn't just wait till December, spend $60, scarf everything up, and wait another year. The reason was because a lot of their content was interactive. They had it when you had them in the browser, you didn't just have the picture coming in. You also had controls. You could type in a message and it would be read by a robotic voice in the studio, or projected on the wall, or sometimes they would have it hooked up to the machines, like if there was vibrators involved or electroshock devices, you would have like the users, the guys out on their laptop computers whacking off.
Whoa. That's badass.
Stuff. So, and yeah, well, obviously a lot of people thought so, because in the documentary, they say that they had 130,000 users when they folded the site up. Now, 130,000 users times $60 is between $7 and $8 million a month.
In the 90s and 2000s.
In the 90s and early aughts. If you figure that his user base probably increased linearly, then multiply by 7 years, divide by 2, you figure he probably made between $200 and $300 million. So I can see why he wasn't all that concerned with keeping the site online after going through a bunch of shit.
I'm going to the Bahamas. Yeah. Fuck all y'all.
So now, if you look at the economics, though, remember what I said was the people who are actually being filmed don't get the money. Now, Brent paid his people what was considered very generously. And the thing they said, their base rate was $1,000 a day if you were a model. And they would pay more if they were going to do something really extreme to you. I mean, because a lot of their models took some pretty serious beatings and shit. They were very careful that it was all stuff that would heal, but it might take a couple of weeks for that to happen. And so you're in for an experience. Some of their models said that they did it just to prove they could survive the experience.
Wow.
And there's a lot about that in the documentary. I can't recommend that documentary highly enough, because there's just a lot. That film, more than anything else, filled in a lot of the blanks for me as to how all of this ended up happening, because most people aren't aware of how Insects is one of the most important things that ever happened to porn in the history of pornography. But anyway, so they might have 20 people on set. There were articles back in the day by people who visited the set and watched Insects, and they would have lighting people and wardrobe people and makeup and all this stuff that you would normally see in a movie shoot, because Brent could afford it. Mm-hmm. Say you're paying 20 people $1,000 a day, and you do this for a month. That's what, $600,000? That's a lot less than $7 million.
Yeah.
So he's still pocket. I mean, he can spend money on everything. He had a full-time metalworking guy who appears in the documentary.
A what?
And the guy who made like metal bondage toys, like manacles and shit. He had a full-time guy to do metal work.
That's balling. A full-time fucking welder or metallurgist. That's next level. That's next level pimping.
Oh, it's it's like, man, it was Jurassic sex. No expense was spared.
Yeah.
And I've seen a few clips of things, and it's like the sets. He had this gritty industrial thing. He wanted it to look like the kind of place that a guy might actually take a naked woman and do this stuff to her, where you could have, where screaming doesn't matter and stuff like that.
Sure.
So at one point, he bought a farm in upstate New York so that he could do outdoor shit. That was just like nothing, you know. But anyway, so he gets shut down, and that's where the baton passes to Peter Ackworth. And there are two really funny stories about Kink.com. The first is how he shut down the Department of Justice and that whole thing that shut down Insex. After they shut down Insex, they started going after other porn producers, and it became clear that they weren't going to stop with the really, really bad guys. Having set their precedent, they were going to work their way up to the entire porn industry and shut everything down. They had found their secret weapon because they had a lousy record with actual obscenity prosecutions.
So why? What was behind all of this? Why were they? Well, it's like busting drug selling. Busting drug selling gangs because the pharmaceutical industry is giving them kickbacks, saying, "Hey, stop them from dealing heroin so they can only buy OxyContin." I mean that's horrible, but at least I rationally understand it. Why are they knocking out all the porn? Because
there's a lot of
Puritans?
People in the United States who are deeply offended at the idea that anyone is having more fun than they are.
Yeah, they're called Puritans.
Yeah, and that's. I mean, you got to think. The kind of guy who gets a law degree and goes to work for the Department of Justice
is probably having vanilla sex.
Yeah, you don't make as much money working for DOJ as you do working for a law firm, especially the kind of law firm that might be hired by the organized crime to defend their sex shop operation.
Yeah.
So they're doing this out of idealism. Now,
assholes.
Yeah, they're assholes. Okay. So anyway, Peter Ackworth at this point has several going websites that are doing pretty well, and he goes to his, and he hears, because the other thing you get the sense of in the graphic sexual horror is several of these people. Ackworth appears in the documentary. Sid Black appears. Brent Scott himself appears, and you get the sense that these guys all know one another. That this was a little group of people who, even though they were competitors, they knew each other. Sure. They were in contact. And so Brent told everybody what happened. And Peter Ackworth proactively went to his bankers and said, look, I know you're going to be getting one of these letters. I'm sure of it. It's bullshit. It's illegal as hell. What I need to know from you is, what do you need from me to have the confidence to tell them they're full of shit and that you're not going to keep their letter secret, and we're going to drag it into the light of day if they insist on doing this, and we're going to fight it. What do I need from you? And what these bankers, who didn't have any kind of primary interest in the sex industry except that they liked the color of its money, was a new set of guidelines. Remember those? So the Wild West became the not so Wild West. Okay. So they developed a bunch of requirements, and they were different than the guidelines that had been in the print and film porn industries. One thing they required, almost everything was about film now. No one does still photography except to promote their films. And one of the requirements was an entry and an exit interview. So you could tell that the model knew what she was about to get into, and afterward that she was okay with it, and that it had been okay. There was a whole bunch of things that you couldn't film. There was a whole bunch of conditions, like if the model started crying, the shoot had to come to an end.
Okay.
Full stop. The things like that. But the bankers set these, and there's another documentary called Kink about Kink.com, which came back later. And it's not nearly as good as graphic sexual horror, but it has its interesting moments. And one of them is Ackworth grumbling that the billers are a moving target. You never know what's going to be allowed. They won't allow us to do tentacle porn because they think it's bestiality, and that's like, okay.
Didn't some politician
but the funny thing
caught,
about
didn't some politician get caught Googling, or he accidentally tweeted what he meant to Google search? It was like back in 2016. Didn't some politician or journalist accidentally tweet what he thought was a Google search, and it was for like tentacle porn?
Yeah, I don't know.
I want to say that was like a meme for like a couple weeks.
It might have been. But anyway, that was the thing. But the Kink documentary isn't very good. For one thing, like I said, there's two funny stories about Kink. One I'm in the middle of and one I'm about to tell. And neither of them are really in the documentary about kink.com. All right. So anyway, Ackworth goes to his bankers and they come up with a set of guidelines. Go up again, so Brent Scott fled the field of battle. Ackworth comes in and saves the day. Okay, he basically saved the bondage porn industry, which basically meant he saved the porn industry. And at that point, a bunch of the previously independent operators sold out to him. So people who had their own websites, their own payment, and their own billing systems, and all their own distribution, their own production, promotional, all just sold out and went to work for Peter Ackworth and became sub-sites under the kink.com rubric. So now he's got like 20 or 30 sites, including, incidentally, Brent Scott and the old Insects crew. He doesn't do the things as elaborate. He's got to follow the new guidelines, but he went back to producing porn. Now, that's the first funny story, is about how Peter Ackworth saved the porn industry by doing his little thing. The second is how he saved the San Francisco Armory. And the funniest thing about that story is that he couldn't have done it without the help of George Lucas.
What the fuck?
All right.
Let's go.
The San Francisco Armory is a 200,000 square foot building built in the style of a Moorish castle in the middle of the Mission District in San Francisco. It's a residential neighborhood. There's this huge 200,000 square foot black elephant. It's okay. So it was built for the California National Guard around 1910, and it was abandoned by them in 1970 because it was completely obsolete for their purposes by this time. Now, it became an eyesore. It became this white elephant on the real estate market. It was way out of code. It was so far out of code, it would have cost a fortune to fix this building up. So making it into condos or apartments or housing was simply not cost effective. Every once in a while, an industry would express interest in it because it's a large open space and it's convenient to shipping venues in the middle of one of the largest cities in the West Coast and all. And the NIMBYs would come down out and shoot it down because San Francisco is the not in my backyard capital of the observable universe. Yeah. And so no matter what industry it was, the whole neighborhood would turn up and say they don't want the traffic, they don't want the pollution, they don't want all these workers coming in and out, that blah, 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 and they would shoot it down. Until 1982, when George Lucas showed up. He needed a big interior space where he could hang models of spaceships and blow them up. And it turns out that the Armory has an attached parade ground, a covered parade ground with a large interior field. The ceiling is like 40 or 50 feet high. In fact, until recently, it may still even be, it was the largest unsupported enclosed space in the state of California. Because I guess nobody had built a domed stadium.
Sure.
So George Lucas shows up and asks for a zoning variance to film a movie there. And this time the locals are like, well, movies are cool and it's Star Wars. And so there wasn't a lot of resistance and there wasn't going to be a lot of traffic or industrial shit going on. So he got his zoning variance and he filmed the special effects for Empire Strikes Back there.
Okay.
And then he went away and it was abandoned again until Peter Ackworth came along in 2005. Now, Ackworth has just made arrangements by which he is going to pretty much own the entire porn industry. And he was already out of space in his old studio, so he needed a bigger place. Well, he realizes that the Armory is a large space that is dirt cheap because of what it is and the condition it's in. But what it is, a warren of dusty little dungeon-like
I was about to
spaces
say,
that.
what is it better than an old fucking castle?
Yeah. So he plops down $14.5 million in cash and buys the building, which is actually dirt cheap for a building that size on a square foot basis.
Yeah.
And because it's already zoned for a movie studio, one of the things he did for research is he found out in California zoning law does not make a distinction between a porn studio and any other kind of film studio. It's zoned for film. He can film there. So he's doing that within a couple of weeks. And, of course, the neighbors at first are a little not too happy about this. But they went to a lot of trouble to be good neighbors, to make a positive impression with the community. They arranged the entire building so that you could get to the parade ground without passing any of the porn stuff, so that they could use the parade ground for public functions and rent it out and do things like skating, use it for skating night and have hockey matches and I don't know what else, because it had stands. So it was a very useful space. And they were very careful about their production because the neighbors were like, there's going to be people, porn at, naked people drifting out onto the street. They were very careful about this. There was no sign out front.
Yeah.
The only hint that you had of what was going on in this building is there was no sign, but the three visible corners on the front and side of the building had huge flagpoles. One of them was flying the American flag. One of them was flying the flag of the state of California, and the other one was flying the gay pride flag.
Okay, but I mean, you're in the middle of San
the
Fran.
Rainbow flag.
You're in the middle of San Fran. That no one would bat an eye, right? That you blend right in.
No,
you're in North Georgia.
That
people are going to be shooting at you.
That was the idea, is to blend in, and so they were very careful about traffic coming and going to make it circumspect and all. So. He poured millions of dollars into bringing the building up to code, upgrading it, fixing things. The entire basement was flooded because there's actually a San Francisco River. The only place that you can get to the San Francisco River now is in the basement of the Armory building. It's been built over for the entire rest of its length, and it had flooded the basement. So for years, he pours money into the building, bringing different spaces up to code so that there's like workrooms for models to do the phone sex thing. There's spaces where the models can live. He devoted the entire top floor to the local fetish community. He built a space called the upper floor and just told the local fetish people, look, here's a nice spiffed up space that you can use with privacy and to sort of schmooze them. And that was the situation until roughly 2018. And what finally ended Kink.com being at the Armory was California was threatening to pass a law requiring porn shoots to use condoms.
What? Did it cut out?
And
it just... Are you back, Roger? The internet cut out. Roger? That might be the perfect segue into another episode. We had some technical difficulties. As soon as we insulted the gods of California for making them use condoms, it cut out. I mean, I don't have to explain it all. It's going to be in the video. Yeah. It cut out as soon as you said that. There's just some Puritan at Langley or Fort Meade at the NSA just going, all right, I've had enough of this. End it now.
Okay. So anyway, they decided that was not going to go for, no one was going to buy their product if they had to do that. Yeah. So they basically picked up and moved their entire operation to Las Vegas. And last year they sold the building for $65 million. But the thing is, now the building is fixed up. It's been brought up to code. There's a lot of it that is already converted to living spaces and stuff. So now it's practical to turn it into normal office space or to use or to build condominiums or apartments there or whatever. So for practical purposes, the building has been saved. And Kink has just moved on. Now, the sad thing, though, is that while Kink was operating out of the armory, they had a tour. For $25 a head, you could take a tour of the building. And it was actually, and I took this tour myself a few years ago, one of my trips to San Francisco. And it was fucking hilarious. Because they warn you at the beginning of the tour, we are going to be touring a operating porn studio. And so you might see something on the course of this tour. As it turned out, we didn't. But you got to go see all of the sets and all of the toys and all of the props and stuff. And it's like, it's really weird to see like a whole wall of dildos graduated in size. Because they had a huge carpentry shop and a huge metalworking shop.
Sure, yeah.
It was just because, again, there was so much money that they could pour it into whatever they thought they needed.
Yeah.
And it was just, and they have a sense of humor about it. The guy who gave us the tour was himself affecting a very flaming gay personality and was kind of hamming it up.
Sure.
But they still have the armory tour, but it's probably not nearly as much fun now. You don't have the 55-gallon drums of personal lubricant anymore.
Well, then is it even worth it? If you can't have 55-gallon drums of lubricant, why the fuck am I buying this ticket?
So, yeah, I don't know. It was worth $25 back in the day, though.
But I'm sure the building is being still used because it's fucking built like a castle. Sturdy as fuck.
And so anyway, the armory is going on to other uses. But that brings us to the present day. And what is the current state of the porn industry? And, well, you've got Kink.com pretty much owns the fetish porn industry now. You see a few operators advertising things that break the guidelines. They almost always don't accept credit cards and have weird alternate payment methods they want, like Amazon gift cards or Bitcoin or something. Or they're located in Eastern Europe and use some sketchy bank located there to process their finances. Now, the problem is the mainstream producers are going extinct because they still have trouble competing with. The print is going extinct too, but the problem is that even when they can monetize the content they make, there's too much competition. They're competing against their own back catalog going back to 1953. They're competing against each other in a shrinking market, and they're competing against their own product being rebroadcast by the tube sites, the YouTube-like sites that do porn. And they get away with pirating the stuff outright because, well, we have any control over what people upload to our YouTube-like site. They monetize it with ads, and it's up to the producers to monitor what's been uploaded and send takedown notices. And the porn producers don't have the resources to do that. The studios do, but the small guys don't. And so what's happening now is actually the porn industry is in a lot of trouble. There's a canard going around that the porn is like some ridiculous percent of internet traffic, and it isn't anymore. That's now sites like Netflix and Amazon Prime and YouTube.
We are going backwards as a society then.
Yeah, well, that's what's happening as we speak, though. Where it's going is that, yes, it's easier than ever to get access to porn, but the distribution cycle has been broken because there's no way for the content creators to monetize. So you don't have that feedback where the end user is subsidizing the production anymore, and that's basically broken the system. So, and I don't know how it's going to stable out at this point. That's just where it is, and it's been pretty much since 2010 or so has been drifting in that direction. And again, it's technology that did that. It became too easy to broadcast video over the internet. And that's what's made the tube sites viable, and it's basically what's resulted in all of this extra competition, and no one has really come up with a compelling model. Kink.com is still doing the interactive stuff like Insects invented. They're not doing as much, or it's not as extreme, but that's one of their draws to get people to come back and spend money. But again, that whole golden age thing where you can walk into any video store and get this high quality product, and Roger Ebert reviewed it and all. That's done up. So,
what's next? What's the future?
Well, I honestly don't know. I don't think that anything is visible yet. I mean, there's a lot of people who think it'll be artificial virtual reality.
Yeah.
And I don't see it. For the same reason that you wouldn't set up a film projector, I don't see people putting on goggles and stumbling around Meet Space Room. Right. Yeah. So and plus, they're frozen out of all the hottest markets too. You got to remember that most people think Facebook is the internet. They don't allow porn. Apple doesn't allow porn in the App Store. Google allows you to put third-party apps that might be porn on their phones, but you can't do it through Google Play. You have to go to a third party. And I don't know about you, but I'm not going to put some sketchy APK file that I don't know where it came from on my Android phone.
There are no porn apps. Yeah, you're right. I was going to say, I mean, Instagram isn't porn, but I mean, I was thinking this the other day. You ever seen those, like, maybe it's just my demographic? You ever seen just like endless, like, you're scrolling, there's just advertisements for like yoga pants? But there's so many times where I watch, the movie They Live, and you put on the...
Yeah.
I swear to God, whenever I'm on Instagram, I delete it. I use it to upload my podcast, and then I delete it, and I re-download it the next day. I delete Instagram and Facebook. I'm not bullshitting you. Every 24 hours, I delete them, upload my podcast, delete them, because it's cancer. That being said, when I'm on it, it feels like I have the They Live glasses on, because I look at all these... It's like, look at these yoga pants, look at these new Skechers. You put on the glasses... All it is there's girls doing just some sort of like fucking like, just so they're doing some position. They're doing some like ass cut. But maybe they have a barbell. No, it's porn. Look at my new sneakers. No, it's porn. Oh my God, look at this seashell I found. No, look at my ass. That's all. Look at this ice cream cone. I'm holding it. I'm like cupping it. I'm like, it's porn. It's just porn.
Yeah, well, and the payoff that they get is when you click on the link and that monetizes it for them.
Yeah.
Half the time, the picture doesn't even have anything to do with the caption that's telling you what you'll get if you click the link.
It's just
you're
hot
right
girl.
That.
It's just some hot girl with huge tits with like perfect makeup, and it's like click here for mouthwash. And you're like, oh, mouthwash, okay.
Yeah.
Bastard.
So the whole thing is really a mess at the moment, and I would be lying if I said I had any idea where it's going. So I had enough trouble figuring out how it got here.
Yeah, that was a brilliant presentation, man. Have you thought about? I mean, I think you could do like a fucking TED Talk or something, man. That was brilliant. That was brilliant. I should have paid you for that. That was amazing, dude. That was legitimately like. I thought I was going to be like laughing at like boobs the whole time. I came in here and sat. I just fucking watched a documentary. I forgot that you're on my podcast. A couple times I was like, who's that in the top right corner? I was like, oh, that's my dumbass. That was legitimately impressive, Roger. Like, kudos. No, really.
I sent my dad a link to the last one, and he said that it looked like a documentary, and that he learned stuff.
Yeah, dude.
The tubes.
My mom's a nurse, and she was like, that was an interesting vacuum. Like, I never knew what a vacuum tube was. I was like, neither did I. Roger, dude, you're good, man. You need a fucking... Unfortunately, I'm not monetized. I'd give you a kickback, but unfortunately, I'm not. It's you.
Well, you're giving me a good opportunity to practice.
No, dude, please, fucking use my podcast as your open mic. Just come up here, and once you get really going, and you're good for like a season finale or a special, ditch me and just go to Netflix or go to a TED Talk and cash it in and leave me in the dust, dude. I'll happily be used. It's fine.
It all comes down to who's going to publish it and how you're going to monetize it and all that stuff. I mean, that's one of the reasons that I had this insight about porn is like the whole thing with my novel is that you have to get it to people and they have to have a way to get money to you in order to thank you for creating it. And a lot of the mechanisms for that have been transient and haven't worked very well, and mechanisms that worked for a while have broken or ceased to exist. It's like the days when you would go hawk your pamphlets on the street corner, and that was a big thing for 150 years.
Yeah.
And then it was nothing.
You're getting payments through Amazon, right?
Yeah, well, if you buy a copy of the ebook, then yeah, I get a royalty on that. That's a big chunk of it. I still have a tip jar. In the beginning, it was all tip jar.
Yeah.
Now I get. Incidentally, if you buy a paper copy, go to Lulu.com and buy it from them instead of from Amazon, because I get like 5 times as much money. They have to charge the same, because the agreement that allows me to have an ISBN and to publish a print book and be listed in bookstore catalogs requires that everyone have the same list price. And with Amazon, after they take their cut, I make like $1.50. But Lulu's base price to print a copy is like $8.95, and I get like $6 instead of
awesome.
Because the whole book industry chunk of that is cut out. You're dealing directly with the publisher there.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, even though I make less money per sale, I make more money from Amazon because everyone sees Amazon.
Well, I mean, I look at how, like, when I first read it in 2016, I didn't even. This sounds like a total like bullshit, but I didn't know there was a tip. I just found it. I was like, oh, cool. Look at this story. I didn't see any payment. I was just, and then when I emailed you and I was like, will you come on my podcast? And you're like, sure. I made sure to go to Amazon. I found it, and yeah, I had no qualms with buying it, mainly because it's Amazon. I don't have to pull up my credit card and put on my glass. Okay, what is my number? It's just I go to Amazon. I have an account. Yeah. One click, I'll buy it. I didn't even look at the price. I was like, I don't give a shit. I love this book. So I mean, it's that's
I appreciate that. Yeah, the tip jar is only on localroger.com.
That's what I mean.
My website. Yeah, and nobody does personal websites anymore.
That's
nobody
what I'm saying.
Does blogs anymore.
You gotta work with what's out there, and that's Amazon.
And and Facebook and Amazon and all, they have their own rules about how you're allowed to monetize stuff on their site. So because they're private. They can impose all kinds of weird rules if they want to, and they do. So it's like, personally, I don't Facebook. I have a Facebook account, which I have mainly to tie up the name Local Roger, and I logged into it like twice.
Yeah, I log in and drop my podcast, and then I delete it. I swear to God, every day I fucking delete it. I'm like, get that cancer patch off my phone. Because it'll suck your brain. Come here. Look at how inadequate you are. Look at how imperfect you are. I'm like, fuck that. Bring them on my phone. Give them the goods. And then I get them right off. And I'm like, y'all are that's fentanyl. Get away from me. Cancer. You're fucking addicted. It is.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding. I'm very firm about that. I kick it the fuck off my phone every day.
Yeah. Well, my story with Facebook was that I had about 10 years ago, it was that long. It was a couple of years after Facebook started. One of my old high school friends who had moved out after Katrina, and I hadn't seen him, he emailed me and said, man, join Facebook and friend me, and we can hang out. And so I created the account, and I went and I friended Patrick and looked around a little bit, and whatever, logged off. So the next day I logged in, looked around a little, didn't see anything too exciting. I logged off. And like 15 minutes later, I get this email from Facebook. Local Roger, we noticed that you logged in and didn't do anything. Here are some interesting suggestions. So I went over to Corrosion and said, guys, I just got the weirdest email from Facebook. It's like they made a record of the fact that I logged in, even though I didn't do anything. And they're all like, oh, yeah, man, they make a record of everything you do, everything you click, everything you read, everything you do. They make records of everything so that they – and I'm like, this is not a service I need in my life.
Nope. If it's free, you're the product, right? Isn't that the quote? If it's free, you're the product. People are like, Mark Zuckerberg sold my data. Mark Zuckerberg gave you server time, gave you a user interface, gave you a neat little app with animations and little noises. It lets you go on there and Facebook and lets you do. He's giving you that dopamine drip. Look at my new house. Look at my new driveway. Look at my tits. Look at my new grandson. Yeah, you're you are the product. You don't. The cow can't look at the slaughterhouse and be like, hey, as you're eating the free corn and you have the free bed and you go, I think they're cutting us up. Well, that's different because you're forced to be there. But let's imagine you were allowed to walk in or out of the slaughterhouse. Yeah, you're allowed to go in there, man. There's a roof. You get away from the rain. They got corn. It's at a cost. Yes. You're walking right into those blades.
It's like the Pink Floyd song Sheep.
Yeah. It's I don't know, man. I don't know. It's weird. And I still get prompts every day. I think I'm on my 8th Facebook account from 2005 until now. I'd just nuke them. I would go in, I'd go in, you have to find out how to delete it first, deactivate it, and then eventually I'd come back. And the most recent one was starting the podcast. I was like, oh, I need to get back on. But one of my friends who's been on Facebook since like 2004 was like, glad to have you back, Tom. And I just thought of like the Matrix line. I was like, this is the 16th iteration. just yield back in.
Yeah.
But, dude, I work at a liquor store, man, and they have shelves in the back. And you know where all this fucking stock is, and it's the easiest way to know what's missing is you just go, you know, it's a 10 by 20 foot stock room. You just go, take your phone, just take 10, 20 pictures in a circle so you know what's there, and then you can walk out onto like the 5,000 square foot huge warehouse. You walk around, you know, you see everything missing, but you know you don't have it, then don't write it down. But you know you have Jack Daniels in the back one, right? It's crude, it's simple, whatever. Point being is now several days a week I have tons of pictures of liquor on my phone. Whatever. I'm 30 years old though, right? It's all right. I look like a crazy person. I know that I've got, you know, probably by now I've got, you know, you just gotta scroll back a couple days and there we are, just a couple days, and it's just, I don't know what that margarita mix, tonic, just all sorts of shit. It's point is so like I said, I don't post anything on Instagram or Facebook aside from links to my podcast. And if I have a thumbnail, which is just a screen grab of what I do is when I get a thumbnail, how I make my thumbnails, I open the video, click on a random spot, move the mouse so everything fades away, and then ching, screenshot. That's all. So there's no point being, I don't post pictures. I now get advertisements on Instagram, on Facebook for the specific bottles that I photograph. And I don't even upload, but I know because when I do upload, I give them access to my photos. I get fucking advertisements for Grey Goose, for Cointreau, for Di Zerona, for Hennessy. Dude, I haven't drank in 4 years. I can't
I have a similar story about Google of all people.
Yeah.
So my wife calls me about maybe 8 years ago, says, or she sends me an email, says, by the way, what's your Google avatar? Is that the Causeway? And I'm like, my Google avatar? I don't have a Google avatar.
Oh, no.
And she says, sure you do. She takes a screenshot and sends it to me, and there's this frame from a YouTube video that I uploaded. Now, I've only ever uploaded 2 YouTube videos in my entire life, and it was back when it was YouTube, before Google bought them. And they were time lapses of my drive across the Causeway. So it starts at night, and the sun gradually rises, and it's kind of cool. I set one of them to music. And at the time, I actually had to use a laptop computer and a webcam, and I had the software running on the floorboard and all. So anyway, when Google, you know, so my wife actually has a Google account. So when she goes to send me an email, or I sent her an email, and she goes to read it in Gmail, Google wants an avatar for me. Mm-hmm. So I have never uploaded a picture of myself to any of the sites that I have ever been a member of, including Google. I have the YouTube account. The only 2 videos I have ever uploaded are these time-lapse driving photos across the bridge. They went and took a still from one of those photos and made it my avatar because they couldn't find another photograph associated with any of my accounts. And to this day, I didn't change it because I wanted to remember that they did an asshole thing like that.
Remember. It's prime minute, like moving the fingers for the book. Don't do that again. It's here, Roger. We got you an avatar. So, don't do that again. It's.
Yeah, I'm like, seriously. Yeah.
It was taken from inside your car. The video you took.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was taken through the windshield.
What if you can enhance the photo and you find that what they actually used was a reflection of your face?
It was on the other side of the windshield. It's not.
Just entertain my stupid idea, Roger. God damn it! Where's your imagination? You change the darkness, the black point. You shift the clarity and the highlights. Get rid of the contrast. Reduce the exposure. And you're like, motherfucker. There's just like a crude outline of your face, and you're like, we're already here.
That camera didn't have enough color resolution to do that. This was like 2007.
They'll find it. Those bastards will. Yeah, man. There's going to be a Wild West of VR, and then it's going to slowly get taken over and be
Yeah.
boring. It's going to start.
I don't see VR ever becoming the thing. I see why some people think it will, but I just think it's too inconvenient. I mean, I've actually played with the VR helmet, with my phone stuck in it and all, and it's like, it's cool, for a few times, but to actually experience, to use that for like an experience that's going to last an hour or an hour and a half, is not something I would want to do very often.
Yeah.
It's like, where do you go? Because you're effectively blind to the outside world while you're doing this.
Yeah.
So what's the usefulness of being able to have the illusion of virtually walking around?
Yeah.
That you're going to walk right into your refrigerator if you try that. I mean, it's not going to work.
Or you got to lock the doors because you're like, I'm cutting myself off. I don't know if someone's breaking in and I'm like, I just fighting orcs or something, like, and it's
I mean, I see it as being a novelty. It's something that you might do occasionally, more likely just once or twice, and I don't see it being a major entertainment. It's just like 3D. For one thing, holography. 3D, like in a tank, was supposed to be the big thing when it's done. And well, first of all, we still can't really do it in a practical sense, but it's not really as practical as science fiction writers thought it was compared to watching on a screen. 3D home TV turned out not to be a thing because you got to put glasses on, or you can't see it. So it's just things have to be convenient as well. This is one of the reasons when the porn thing started on the internet that it mainly only took off in the fetish communities and all, because a computer, especially in 1995, was not a very convenient device to use to view porn. So that has a lot to do with it. I mean, I actually had one of my readers back in the earliest days after I put it on Corrosion, and I was collecting emails, and I had an email from a woman who said, "Please come out with a version of this printed on paper so I can read it in the bathtub."
Jesus, it's what a weird. What the fuck? Yeah.
I got some interesting emails over that, by the way. Yeah,
I believe you.
What do you think I found out so much about porn?
Yeah, that touche. I just thought you were a scholar and a gentleman, but I guess that makes sense as well. Just people, it's I think VR will take off if there can be something where you just press a button or it's just an app and it's like full immersion. I mean, dystopian reality aside, let's say you get some Neuralink implant, 10th generation, 2040.
That's what it's going to take. Is it's going to have to be direct neural interface, and there's going to have to be some mechanism where you can quickly slip out of it if you need to attend to the real world.
Yep.
And we are nowhere near.
No. We're not. Right now we're at the suitcase size cell phones. And it's going to be exciting to watch nonetheless. It's like, the ride's going to be fun. But that's what it'll have to be. One press, full immersion, you can lay down but move around in it, smells, sights.
Well, and again, what made porn practical as a video as video medium for computers was really cell phones and tablets, because now you can see this stuff.
Little porn box.
You can carry it with you. Yep, you can watch it in the bathtub if you want.
Yeah,
you can, whatever. But that wasn't the case until about 10 years ago, really. Can you imagine? Now, personally, I'm the kind of guy. It's like the idea of watching a movie on my cell phone is a complete you've got to be fucking kidding me. I would never do that. It would just be I'm sitting here like this for an hour and a half.
I've done it.
My eyesight is already bad enough.
I've done it hungover, and don't want to get out of bed. I'm just like, I just need to pass the time. You find a pirated movie and you just, you kind of watch it. Yeah, but if you're gonna invest the 2 hours,
I would much rather put it on the TV set,
big
kick
TV,
back and
crank up the music, enjoy it. Yeah, it's
And again, that's another thing about VR is a solitary experience. I mean, even if you are doing VR where there's other people in the simulation, that's not the same as being together in meet space. Even if the other guy's on the other side of the room, that's a really strange
Not the
way
same.
of being together with someone.
Yeah.
For the same thing, I'm really not impressed by the people who think cyber sex will become a thing, despite the fact that phone sex was at one time. It's just the boosters have not caught up with the negative. No one looks at the negatives on stuff. I have this thing at work with the argument between technicians and engineers. Engineers are about making stuff work, and technicians don't realize just how much an engineer has to do to make sure that something will work. There's a lot of math involved. There's a lot of subtle things that have to be accounted for. But the engineer is thinking about how the thing is going to work. They're not really inclined to think of how it's going to fail. So that's how you end up with the bolt in a place where you can't get a fucking spanner on it. The technician is thinking of how am I going to fix this thing when it breaks, and the first thing they see is that damn bolt that you can't put a spanner on.
Yeah.
They're like, what moron did this?
Yeah.
And so technicians are convinced that engineers are morons, and engineers are convinced that technicians are
pessimists.
Yeah, well, it's more that they're Philistines who don't understand the subtleties of things. Now, I was trained as an engineer. I have 3/4 of an engineering degree, so I know how engineers are trained to think. And I spent my life actually as a technician, so I know how technicians have to think. And I understand both ways of coming at it. So when I'm in a room, it's like watching a ping pong match. It's like I know what both of these guys are thinking and why, and neither of them is seeing the other's point of view. But where this links back is that when I hear like the boosters for things like VR, they're not seeing how it's going to break. They're not seeing how it's inconvenient, how it's an imposition, how it's socially awkward. All of these can be deal breakers. And, it's like a subtle thing. Like you would think, well, how important is that? The difference between walking in this door of an adult theater and walking in the door of your video rental store is night and day.
Yeah.
But if you're the producer, you're making the exact same product. You may not even realize how much that change in the distribution channel has changed your ability to monetize what you're creating. You're creating the exact same thing, but it's reaching the end user in a completely different way. And that's another thing with VR. VR uses a shitload of bandwidth. To do it right, uses way more bandwidth than video. So what are we back to? The video that you extract from it is low res because you've got to have enough information to reconstruct a three-dimensional environment? Or are you going to have a low enough latency connection so that the connection can say you have moved your head and serve it up from the server just that frame that you need at that moment? You got guys that feel like they're being cheated if they don't get 120 frames per second on their video game console. It's like, and we're going to make them happy with this technology. I just see, I see all the obstacles and I don't see solutions to a lot of them. So that's why I'm not really seeing the next technology. That's why I'm not seeing the next technology for porn, because I see where it is. And I'm not seeing how the deal gets broken. There's obviously a shoe waiting to drop, and I don't know who it's going to fall on at this point. But the tube sites are basically strangling the mainstream porn industry. The fetish porn industry is hanging on by a thread despite the tube sites because they're narrow focus and they can still do interactivity, which is a bigger thing for fetish consumers than it is for mainstream. But if no one is going to pay for production, then why would anybody produce something except crap? And that's what you're also getting now is you can't compete. You can't sell something that people are giving away for free. It's why you can't sell what's being broadcasted on the tube sites, but you also can't sell what people are voluntarily making for free with the tools that exist now. You've got entire communities that write their own fiction and share it. That's how 50 Shades of Grey got started. It was fanfic.
Really? That's cool. I didn't know that. That's cool. Props to that guy or girl.
Yeah. In fact, it was a vampire. What is it? It wasn't Buffy. It was the other one. It was fanfic for one of the popular vampire story series.
That's cool.
But they have a subgenre of it that is basically mortals only. And so 50 Shades of Grey started out as an online serial for this group. And so you can't compete with written fiction if that's what you're doing. There are people writing their own porn all over the place.
Yeah.
There are people doing what they call rendering, where they do 3-dimensional models using Poser and have the computer spend 20 hours rendering them as a photographic image.
Yeah.
And to get people or pseudo people in these situations. And that still isn't very good, but it's getting very noticeably better year by year. Eventually it's going to be possible to make video that way.
Yeah.
So you've got all of these forces swirling around, and I don't really see where the next step is personally. But I see all of the potential suggestions that I've seen are seriously flawed. I think that's going to be like Laserdisc or something. It's going to look great on paper and it's going to be real impressive, and it's not going to fly commercially.
Yeah, what it's going to be is it's just going to, like all Darwinian selection, it's not going to stop. We know that. The porn's not going to stop. It will find a way. It'll be just like a DNA mutation. It'll find a way, and it'll be just as alien to us as we look back at 1910 with the Armory, and they're like, you'll never know that one day there's going to be like high fidelity, high resolution pornography filmed here with a
Yes. Don't tell the architect.
No, piped in over the internet. What's the internet? It's fiber optic. What's fiber optic? Oh, it's it's going to be so far out that there's imagine
one day this building will have the largest server room in San Francisco.
Yeah. What's a server room? It's going to be like, we're laying out railroads. We're going to corner the market, and it's like, no, really, all you need is like a mile by 1 mile area. And do what with it? You're going to build an airport, and then you just don't need anything outside of that because you're going to go over it. What are you talking about? You have to have a physical structure. No, you just need one little patch. That's it. You can go from there, wherever you want. Tokyo, Atlanta. That's what it's going to be. Is we're going to look back at this, and pornography is just going to be like, oh, it did that thing. These guys, Tommy and Roger, could have never seen whatever.
Oh, absolutely. But on the other hand, it could be another 15 years while people are looking back at, if you look at Behind the Green Door or the stuff that Insects and Kink were doing in 2003, then there's nothing like that being produced ever since then.
Yeah, maybe we go back. Maybe we go back in time. Terrence McKenna, the Archaic Revival. We go back. You find a spot in reality that was working well, and then you bring that moment into the future. That's what he said. That's what he said. You were.
I think the connection is faltering again.
Oh, damn it! Can you hear me, Roger? Are we good? Okay.
Well, it was just starting to break up a little.
All right. Well, let's wrap this bitch up. We are almost at 100 minutes on the nose. That's impressive. But let's do another. Can I grab you for another episode next week?
Sure.
Real time. Let me check. Make sure I'm not working. Roger, kill the dead space, Roger.
What are we going to talk about?
Porn, boobs, aliens. Yeah, I'm good. Next Wednesday. Today's Wednesday. Yes, next Wednesday. I'm good. You want to do another episode next Wednesday? Same time? Or later? We started earlier.
Let's see. I have a dramatic tale to tell about the casino industry and card counting and all kinds of interesting stuff.
Booked. We're doing it. This is going to be the humble beginnings. The whole thing is not that this is the humble beginnings of TPC. TPC is going to die out. They're going to find my body dead in a ditch, and I'm going to be a nobody. But this is going to be the humble beginnings of Roger Williams, right? It's going to be like...
Well, you've actually had some pretty interesting guests, so it's like I would expect eventually for it to pick up somehow. And
it's gonna. I have faith. I think it will.
I'm sending the links to a few people.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
I think they're coming out good.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. It'll
be interesting to see what my dad's reaction is to this one.
Hey, man. Hey, man. There's two types of people in the world. There's people that watch porn and they're fucking liars. Right? That's it. That's what Ed Snowden said. If you need to read Ed Snowden's book, Permanent Record. That's what he talks about. He's like, for everyone worried about the government looking at your porn, nobody gives a fuck. They're like, guess what? You watch porn. So does your neighbor. Guess what? So does your grandma. No, not your grandma. Oh yeah, so does your grandma, and so does mine. It's not that you respect the privacy. You just get to a point where you get numb to it. You're like, I don't give a fuck. I know the director of the CIA is looking at porn. I don't give a shit. So am I. Whatever. You said you just become numb to it. So, yeah, to anyone that doesn't like this idea, shut up.
Maybe we should be more like the Romans and just not give a shit.
I think that is... Dude, in my idea of how world peace comes about, it's going to be somehow everyone gets locked in at the next Bilderberg meeting or some shit, or UN, and someone pipes in gaseous MDMA and Viagra, and they all just fuck. And we're gonna have world peace because there's no way you can send Marines to die in other people's countries when you have been locked in an eternal gaze while coming into one another. There's no way you're gonna bomb each other's nation when you have twisted into a twin flame with another person. That's how I look at it. Like even exes, as much time has passed, you still look back and you're like, you know what? I learned a lot about myself, and I hope that person does well. We just need all of the fucking world leaders to just look at each other and be like, you know what? Like, I have some kinky memories of that guy. No, we're not bombing them. Let's try to work this out. We don't need an embargo. We don't need nukes. I used to fucking jizz on that guy's face. World peace, right? It's... What else would do it? Because hey, right now, what's working right now is we're pointing nukes at each other. So anything less mad than that, to me, I'm like, a bunch of people fucking. That's a lot less crazy than 70,000 nuclear-tipped warheads pointed at each other. Yeah. On that note, this podcast has descended into insanity. So, but hey, to me, that's the mark of a good podcast when it eventually wheedles out into psychedelics, world peace, fucking, and UFOs. We haven't even touched on that, so we stayed on the rails. But, yeah. Did you see that UFO sighting over New Jersey that everyone was freaking out about? Turns out it was just the Goodyear blimp. But it's the way the fog shrouded it. Yeah. It shrouded the screen, so what was the Goodyear blimp with the screen, because of the fog, it turned into a disc with a blue hue at the bottom. People are stopping on the side of the turnpike like, oh, fuck, it's a UFO. It's the fucking Goodyear blimp. There's just some dude up there, his hand on his dick, driving around.
I've heard a similar story about, in fact, a friend of mine told me that they didn't believe that one of the famous UFO reports was determined to be a flock of geese. And they were like, no, that's bullshit. No one would mistake geese for the way that these things were described. And they were watching over the lake at sunset one day, and a flock of geese came over, and they were illuminated just so that the sunlight was bouncing off of their white bellies, and they looked like these UFOs, circling around one another. And they were like, until I saw it with my own eyes, I would have never believed that you could mistake them. But I could tell that they were geese before the lighting, before they got into that light.
But if you had only seen that,
it was, who would think that? It's like, no, the government is pulling my leg. There's no way that those were geese. And I was like, damn, I saw them and they were geese.
Meanwhile, they just have the
just like they described.
They have the CIA agents looking at each other like it really was geese. It really was swamp gas. God damn it, it was. I swear to God. It's like in Annie Jacobson's DARPA, The Pentagon's Brain, which is a great book. They talk about having this early radar station in Antarctica or Greenland, wherever, some frozen tundra, and they calibrated it, and it was so right, and it was so perfect. And then, like the first day it came on, they saw a massive, all-out Soviet attack, and they were like, "Oh no!" And it was picking up the moon. Coming over the horizon.
I saw that story.
Okay.
All right. It was the moon.
All right. Well, fuck me. All right. There was my cool story. Thanks, Roger. I saw that. Next story, funny boy. Roger Williams, author of The Metamorphosis of Prime Intellect. I will link that in the top comment and in the description. Till next week. And hopefully that this is the beginning of the Roger Williams documentaries. I think it will be. I think it will be. You're gonna be the new Ken Burns. Like, yeah, he got started on that. What was that guy's name? That shitty podcast, PTC, whatever. Yeah, I don't know. That guy's dead. They found him. They found him dead in a barn with a bunch of cows. Yeah, whatever. It was that guy, Roger Williams. That's the That's how I'm going down.
See you next week.
All right, yeah, we'll wrap that bitch up. All right, Roger, stay safe. I'll send you an email on like Monday or something. We'll get in touch and yeah. All right, my man. Thank you again. Stay safe, buddy.
Bye.
Peace.